everyone, and welcome to today's Free Training Thursday. I have with me Darren. I have here with me Darren Juby from Amicus Attorney, and he'll be taking us through the Abacus court rules. As always, if you have any questions, please put them in the sidebar, and we'll get to them at the end if we have time. I'll now turn it over to Darren, and he'll take us through his presentation.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's Abacus Next Free Training Thursdays webinar. As Amanda said, this week we're going to be focusing on Abacus court rules within Amicus Attorney. Also, as Amanda said, my name is Darren Juby. I'm a Senior Training Specialist here at Abacus Next, and of course my focus is indeed the Amicus Attorney product line. We're going to cover a lot of information in a short time frame here today, so without further ado, let's begin. So you guys will see I'm already logged into Amicus Attorney here. Just a brief agenda of the topics we're going to be covering in today's session. We're going to talk about what are Abacus court rules within Amicus Attorney. We're going to talk about what you need to take advantage of Abacus court rules within Amicus Attorney. We'll briefly talk about licensing and configuring Abacus court rule sets for the firm. We'll touch upon court rule events, and in doing so, we'll talk briefly about editing and deleting them, as well as holidays and how that's handled with the court rule events. We'll briefly discuss assigning a court rule set to a file. We'll talk about creating court rule events, modifying them, deleting them, and if we have time remaining at the end, we'll get into some questions if you guys have any at that time. So without further ado, let's begin quickly here talking about what are the Abacus court rules within Amicus Attorney. They allow you to create, modify, and delete court rule-based events on your files. A court rule defines a series of standard tasks with their deadlines for a particular legal action in a particular court, and that could be federal, state, or at the county level. This feature will save time during the execution of client matter files by ensuring that no steps were missed. Creating a court rule event requires a different procedure from the standard way of creating appointments and or to-dos within Amicus Attorney. So for those of you that are familiar with doing so, there's a little bit of a different workflow involved in taking advantage of the court rule side of things. Special functions are accessed from the files and calendar modules respectively. These functions are available only if your firm has licensed at least one court rule set. The court rules are treated as a special class of events within Amicus Attorney. Each set of court rule events is treated as a group. Each event in a group contains information that relates it to the other events within that group, and a reference field in each court rule event allows additional relevant information to be recorded. So what do you need to have to take advantage of the Abacus court rules within Amicus Attorney? Well, you need to have at least the 2016 version of Amicus Attorney with Update 61 applied or higher. If you're not sure of what version of Amicus Attorney you're running, you can very easily tell by going to the Help menu, as you can see I'm doing here, and selecting About Amicus. It will tell you what your server, workstation, and database versions are. In this case, you can see I'm on the latest and greatest, which is 20.2.0.2. So again, you need to have 2016 with Update 61 applied, so that would have 16 there, and 61 is the final number here, or anything higher than that. So in this case, 20.2.0.2, again, is the most recent, latest and greatest, and that will give me the ability to take advantage of this feature. Once I've got that in place, then I simply have to reach out to my Abacus sales representative here and purchase a license for one or more Abacus court rule sets. So that's a nice segue into the next thing that we're going to be talking about here, which is licensing and configuring of the Abacus court rule sets for the firm. So as I stated, to purchase one or more Abacus rule sets and enable the court rules feature in Amicus Attorney, please contact your Abacus sales representative to get the process started. Once you've purchased a license for at least one or more available court rule sets, to see that list of available court rule sets or to set a related option, an Amicus administrator, and it needs to be an administrator because you need to have access to this administration section you see here, so you can go into firm settings like you'll see I'm doing here. And under calendar, we would click on court rules. To enable the Abacus court rules, once we're in here, we simply click on this checkbox right here, Enable Abacus Court Rules. So as you can see, we got the prompt telling us that our Abacus court rules are now ready. I'm just going to take that toggle off just so you can see that here are the 5 court rule sets that I have purchased for this particular installation for purposes of demonstration and so forth. So now that we've got them enabled, we can filter the list. It's populated automatically by the court rule sets that have been licensed, as you can see here. We can check this box here to show all court rule sets, including unlicensed ones. So as you can see here, the ones that are in bold or black text, if you will, are the ones that I am actually licensed to use, whereas these grayed out ones are ones that are available, but I do not have a license to use them. Now, as well, there are some other options here that we want to quickly touch upon. So weekend scheduling. So we can set an option here that specifies what we want Amicus to do whenever a calculated court rule event deadline falls upon a weekend. So by default, as you can see here, it is set to move it to the Friday preceding that particular weekend. But we can select from this drop-down menu, we can select the option to schedule it anyways, or to move it to the Monday that's after that particular weekend. Now, a very important caveat to mention here, this setting does not affect any events that are scheduled based on court days. When events are scheduled based on court days, any holidays and or weekends are automatically skipped. So this particular setting here is only going to apply to any rule sets that are calculating days based on actual calendar days versus court days. And then the last thing I want to touch upon briefly here in this area is the Reset ACR Connection button here. So we can click this button to update the list if it's necessary, or for whatever reason, if we've made some changes somewhere along the way, we've purchased a new license but it's not showing up here yet, we can simply click on this Reset ACR Connection button, and that would hit our license server and re-download all of the information to make sure that you've got the most up-to-date information in your database. And that way, if you had purchased an additional license for a court rule set and it wasn't already showing up, at that point it should be, and then it would be accessible for you to use. So we've enabled the court rules here, so I'm going to just say OK on this. And now let's talk a little bit about the court rule events themselves. So court rule events, like I said earlier, they're treated as a special class of calendar events within Amicus Attorney. A file may have one or more groups of court rule events on it. Each group contains a trigger event whose date determines the dates calculated for all other events in that group. A group may also include one or more what we call parent events, whose dates determine the dates of further dependent what we call child events. If a child event has 2 parent events, the court rule itself is what determines whether it's the parent with the latest or the earliest date that will determine the child's date. A court rule event may be associated with only one file. Now, before I get into a demonstration of all this, there's just a couple of other things I want to touch upon. First of which is editing and deleting court rule events. So court rule events may be edited within Amicus Attorney just like other events. However, if a court rule event needs to be rescheduled, it is best practice and very highly recommended to use the Modify Court Rule Events function to ensure proper recalculation of dates. As well, if people assignments on events need to be changed, we also recommend that you use the Modify Court Rule Events function. If events need to be deleted, there is a Delete Court Rule Events function that can be employed as well. And again, I mentioned holidays earlier, so I just want to briefly touch upon this and how it is dealt with as far as Abacus court rules go. So court rule event deadlines based on court days are calculated to avoid falling on your firm's observed holidays. Holidays are not considered for events that are calculated based on calendar days, like I mentioned earlier. Now, a special note here is to help verify a calculation that's been done. If you're unsure of any dates in there, consult with your local jurisdiction's online court date calculator. So let's quickly talk about how to assign a court rule set to a file. I haven't done so yet, so let's go through the process of doing so here. So the first thing we would want to do is go to the Files module here and open up the file details. So I'm going to open up one of my files here. You'll see I've got one called Court Rules Training File. And so now I've got the file details open here. So from the Actions menu here, I can go to the court rule, and I should have set this differently, so let me just remove that quickly. So it did retain some settings that I had set before, so I apologize for that, folks. So as you can see, I'm going to the Actions menu, we're going to Court Rule, and we're going to select the option to select the rules set. So what this does is it brings up the Select Rules Set dialog. And again, as I've stressed before, only the licensed rule sets that we have for the firm are listed here on the left, as you can see. And the rule that's assigned to the file will be listed on the right. So in this case, I'm just going to pick one randomly. We will say California Eastern District. Why not? And I will say OK on that. And I get this prompt here. Do I wish to create court rule events using this rule set? If I click yes on that, it's going to take me to the next section we're going to be talking about here in this session. So I'm simply going to click no on this for the time being. And as you can see here now, if I go to the Actions menu and go to Court Rule again, you will see that that rule set that I've selected is now indeed the default for this file. So now when we go to create any events for this, it's going to pull from this particular default rule set. So of course, this is a perfect segue into creating court rule events. We've already got our file details window open. And we can go to the Actions menu here again. And this time we're going to go down to Court Rule. And this time, instead of selecting the first option, we will select the option to create court rule events. So let me just mention here that if a rule set had not been previously assigned to this file, then we would be prompted first with the rule set selection dialog that we saw earlier, where we would select the rule set that we're going to use on this file. We've already done that in this case in the previous portion of this session, so we therefore are now at the Create Court Rules event dialog. Sorry, this is the Select Court Rule event dialog. So from here, we can select the rule that we want to use. So in this case, I'm going to select Motion for Relief Hearing. And we'll say OK on that. And so now, appearing on my screen is the Create Court Rule Events dialog. And by default, we are on the Set Options tab here. So from here, we can set attributes for the events that will be created. We can select the firm members and or the contacts that are going to be associated to the events. In the court rule reference field here, we can enter some text that we want to appear in the reference fields for each event created by the court rule, or I can leave it with what's there now. And under the to-dos section here, we can select how we want to schedule the start date for any to-dos that are created by this court rule. We can start them either today or a certain number of days before the deadline. Note that this will not affect the event's deadlines themselves. And we also have this last option here of marking past to-dos as done. So if we check off this checkbox, any to-dos that are created whose calculated deadline is before today will be marked as being done. So this could be very useful if we're applying the court rule in the middle of an ongoing court action, for instance. So I'm just going to check that off here. And then let's move to the Calculate tab quickly. And so here on the Calculate tab, we've got to complete the following sections. So in the date field here, this is where we're going to enter the trigger event date to base all of our calculated dates upon. So what I'm going to do is select a date well into the future here. We will select August the 30th. And we will state that it's an appointment starting at 9 a.m. and ending at 10:30 a.m. I could create it as a to-do, however, if I so wanted to. But I'll leave it as an appointment. We can also, in the trigger event title field here, we can give it a different title if we so choose. I'm going to leave it as such just for the purposes of our demonstration here today. And as well, same holds true for the trigger event main note box here. I could add some information in here, but again, I just want to leave it as is so that you guys can get a good picture of how things are going to turn out with me not really adjusting anything in regards to those settings. And as well, we do have this option here. Even though we set it in the firm settings, we could change what we want it to do if any calculated dates fall upon a weekend based solely on this particular set of events that are being created. So we won't affect that firm setting that we had said earlier about moving it to a Friday. But in this case, I might say schedule it anyway or move it to a Monday. Again, for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to leave it as the default setting here. And so now that everything is completed here as far as my setup goes, I want to click on the Calculate button. And in doing so, what you'll see happen here is over on the right, we now have all the events created for this particular rule set. And as you can see, it is telling us which one is the trigger event or the base. And then in these 3 to-dos, it's giving us the information on here. It's the deadline minus 7 days, deadline minus 14, and deadline minus 2 court days, for example. I could collapse that or expand this area. And what I want to do is make sure that I've reviewed all these and all the events that I want to have created, make sure that I've got the checkbox in there, or the check mark in that particular box, I should say. I could deselect some of these if I didn't want them to be created as part of the set, but again, for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to simply leave as is. And I could also click this option here to remember checks. So what that does is any check marks I have in these boxes, the next time I go and use this same rule set to create events, it will remember what I had selected here. So at this point, I am ready to go, so I will click on the Create Events button. And if I now go to the events view on my file details here, you will see that there are those events that have been created. There's the trigger appointment, and there is the 3 to-dos that go with it. So now that we've talked about creating them, we want to talk about modifying court rule events. So as I stated earlier, you can make changes to the details of your court rule events that have been created in Amicus Attorney. Most of these changes can be done in the same way that you would modify regular appointments and to-dos. However, it is recommended that the dates of court rule events be changed only via the court rule feature. So if I had to modify the title of this or maybe add a note to it or something like that, very easy to do so. I simply open up the event details here and do so. However, I'm going to click cancel on that for a moment. If I wanted to reschedule this particular event, I don't want to just open up the event details and change the dates the way I would with a normal event, or I don't want to just drag and drop it somewhere else on my calendar. In this case, what I want to do is open up the file details and view the events as we're doing here now. I could select this particular court event. So we're going to talk about the trigger event here because that will give us a good demonstration of what it does to the other events. So if I've selected this event, I could go up to the Actions menu here, go to Court Rule, and select Modify Court Rule Events. As you will see, it brings up this particular window. Now I'm going to close that because I want to show you the other way of doing so. So if I open up the event details, as you've seen here, you will see that because this is a court rule event, it has this extra button here called Modify Court Rule Event. So I can click on that, and as you can see, it brings up the Modify Court Rule Events dialog, just like it did from me going to the Actions menu. So now that this has appeared, it's listing all of the events here belonging to this same court rule created at the same time as the event that we selected. So we want to simply ensure that the court rule event that we want to modify has been selected here. So as you can see, we've done so there. So now under the Set Options tab, we've got a couple of different options available to us. We could reschedule the entire series. And if we select that option, it will reschedule the entire series of court rule events. We can also select the option to reschedule the selected event. This will make changes to the selected court rule event and any child events only. So in this case, I'm going to simply select the option to reschedule the entire series. And we will change the date. It only moved a day. We'll put it to Friday, August the 31st. So we've changed the date for the selected event as desired. In the exception for child events section here, we've got a couple of options to take a look at as well. So under the Done To-Dos, we can change the way the dates for Done To-Dos are affected by the court rule event modification. So from this drop-down menu, we could say Ignore or Change the Date. If we select the Ignore option, it will retain the original date of the Done To-Dos. If we select the Change Date option, then the date of the Done To-Dos will be based on the change made to the selected court rule event. So I'm going to select Change Date there. And as well, we've got another option here for active to-dos and future appointments with date changed elsewhere. So here, we can change the way dates for active to-dos and any future appointments are affected by this court rule event modification. So again, we've got some options here to select from. We've got the ignore option, which much like in the previous drop-down, will retain the original dates of active to-dos and future appointments. We've got the option to change the date. If we select this, it'll change the date of active to-dos and future appointments based on the change made to the selected court rule event. If we select the option to resolve individual items, then this will grant us the ability to change the dates for each active to-do or future appointment on an individual basis. So when this option is selected, any active to-dos or future appointments will be marked with a conflict icon and a description of that conflict. At that point, we could right-click on each of those items, and we would have some options to resolve. So let me just show you how that would work here. It's not going to show me there. But basically, we would have the option to select resolve by keeping date. So that would retain the original date, remove the conflict icon and the conflict information for the event, or we could select the option to resolve with calculated date. That would update the event's date based on the change made to the selected court rule event. The icon for that updated event would then be changed to a rule changed icon, and the description would be updated accordingly as well. So I'm just going to leave ignore on that. Or you know what, let's set that to change date. We'll keep the same pattern going here. And now under the change for rescheduled events section, under the event title, I'm going to leave it as do not change, and I'm going to do the same thing for event main notes. We could select the option here of revert to default. So if we select do not change, it's going to retain the original event title. If we select the revert to default, it will use the title from the court rule itself. Well, we didn't change that, so it wouldn't matter what option we selected here. But in the event main notes drop down here, we've got the same options: do not change, revert to default, or append rescheduling info. So they're the same as in the previous one, except for the append rescheduling info would append a note to the main note with the date and everything, suggesting that that was when the change was made. So I'm going to leave my selection such as that, and we're ready. So I'm going to click on the reschedule button here, and as you can see, that has been changed. So this means that the date was changed by the user when you see this icon with the U, and then you see this one with the R, that means the date was changed by the rule. So because we made a change to the scheduling, those icons are showing up so that we know that those changes were made. And again, we know just by looking that this was done by a user, and these subsequent changes were because of the rule itself. So once we've confirmed that everything is good, we simply click on the Modify Events button, and voila, our dates have been changed. Now, when it comes to deleting court rule events, this is the last item we've got to discuss here, and just looking at our time, this is wrapping up perfectly. So deleting court rule events is just like deleting other events in Amicus Attorney. When Amicus detects that your deletion includes a court rule event or more, the following prompt will appear, and I'm going to show you guys this. So you'll see I've selected the trigger event here. I'm going to right-click and select delete. We get the prompt, am I sure I would like to delete the selected event? I'm going to say yes, and this prompt then appears. Your selection includes court rule event. Deleting in this manner will not delete the child events. To avoid this result, use the delete court rule events function. Do you wish to continue? So I could simply select the option to delete this, but as it states, that's going to cause me some grief most likely. So what I'm going to do instead is click on this button here, Delete in Court Rule Dialog. When I do so, the Delete Court Rule Events dialog appears for me. And from here, I can check the Allow Deletion of Done To-Dos and Past Appointments option, which will do exactly what it says. It will delete any to-dos or past appointments, and those to-dos would be the ones that are marked done, I should say. And then from there, I simply have to check off the court rule event or events that I wish to delete. So in this case, I'm going to select them all. And once I have done so, I simply click on this Delete Events button down here at the bottom of this dialog. You will see I get this prompt, 4 events will be deleted. Do I wish to continue? I will say yes. And as you can see, those court rule created events have now been deleted from this particular file. So that, in a very quick and high-level overview, is the Abacus Court Rules feature within Amicus Attorney. Now, I was just about to say, if anybody has any questions, please submit. And I do see that Andrea has already beat me to the punch on that front. So, Andrea, in regards to your question, is there a way to delete all? Admittedly, that would be a great feature, but as you could see when we saw that, there was not the option for me to do that. What I would suggest doing is, if you have the latest, greatest version of Amicus Attorney, you do have this feedback option up here. Click on that. That's what I was just about to get to, Andrea. Again, you've beat me to the punch. We are on the same wavelength here, though. I like that. So basically, what I would suggest doing is that we've added this feedback feature for scenarios such as this, where there's a feature in Amicus Attorney that maybe needs something added to it. It's one thing for us as, employees of the company to go to the product managers and the development team and so forth and say, hey, you guys should add this, or you should add this because this is what we've heard from clients and so forth. But when it comes from the clients themselves, it tends to hold a little bit more weight, at least in my opinion, and what I have seen in my 10, almost 11 years here with Abacus Next and before that Amicus Attorney. So the reason I wanted to show you this feedback feature, and this is a great segue because in 2 weeks I will be doing a free webinar on that particular topic, but it opens up a web portal here, and I'll give you guys the URL as well in case you don't have the latest and greatest version of Amicus. It's amicusattorney.featureupvote.com. What this is that button takes us to this portal, and you can see different things that other clients and users of Amicus Attorney have already suggested as new features or updates to features or enhancements and so forth. So you could review these, for instance, and if you see one that you like, click on that upvote option. But what I want to also show you is if we go back to all suggestions here, or the main page when it takes you in. So Andrea, this would be a good way for you to put your suggestion in, is if you click on the add your suggestion button here, you can type in what you want your suggestion to be, give it a little bit of a detailed description if so, and put your name and your email. Your email won't be displayed on screen, so other users aren't going to be able to see this and start reaching out to you. But this is useful information for our product management team because then they can turn around and follow up with people if necessary, but they can also take metrics of how many people are wanting to see certain features and so forth, and that can help them determine what's going to be the next item on the list that gets worked on or added or enhanced or whatever the case may be. So Andrea, do take advantage, and anyone else that's listening here as well, do take advantage of that feedback feature. It's an absolutely incredible addition to our Amicus Attorney product, and it gives you guys that extra avenue of getting your voices heard, and to me that's the most important thing of this all. It will make us a better product by taking your suggestions and your advice on how you think it's going to make your lives easier. In the end, that will allow us to make the product better and more useful for you guys. Now, if there's any other questions, please do feel free to jot them in there. I see we've just got a couple more moments, so I'll just give it another minute or so before I do my closing here. And you are quite welcome, Andrea. Thank you. Okay, I don't see any additional questions here. So it looks like we've reached the end of our session today. We've got about a minute left here. So I just want to thank everyone for attending and participating in today's Abacus Next Free Training Thursdays Amicus Attorney Abacus Court Rules session. We do hope to see you back here next Thursday, where we will be discussing Amicus Attorney Reporting 101. Now, please note that I will not be leading that session next week. My colleague Paul will be handling that in my absence, as I'll be off on vacation, but I will be returning on the following week to host the Amicus Attorney Feedback feature session that I just mentioned earlier when talking about Andrea's question there. So again, thank you all for attending, and have a wonderful rest of your day and week.